I was talking to my family recently about snobbery and the best ways of confronting snobbery because we have friends who we know and love very much who have some snobby tendencies, and we don't know how to best address those tendencies. Now, in order to explain the different approaches that we came up with, I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario in order to spell out the different ways that you can deal with a snobby person. And for the purposes of this hypothetical, we're going to talk about educational snobbery. Got it, Will?
Educational snobbery. So as in, I'm better than you because I've gone to this college or this
Correct.
high school and you haven't. Okay.
Correct.
That's a problem.
It is a problem. Okay, here's your hypothetical. You have three people hanging out. One goes to a community college in the Boston area. Another goes to Tufts. And another goes to Harvard. They're all hanging out together, having a good time. And the one who goes to the community college leaves the group for whatever reason, leaving only the Tufts guy and the Harvard guy there to talk. The Tufts guy says to the Harvard guy, "Wow, that guy kind of sucks. He goes to a community college, am I right?" Now, if the Harvard guy is what I'll call an anti-snob, he's going to say the following. Actually, we shouldn't judge people based on where they go to college. What matters is what you do with the information that you acquire wherever you go to school and the morality with which you turn your knowledge into something productive and pro-social. That's what the anti-snob would say. In other words, the anti-snob tries to undercut the entire system of snobbery that the snob has laid out. The counter-snob in this situation, the Harvard guy, would say to the Tufts guy, "Well, who are you to talk? You just go to Tufts."
No, you don't. Wait, you don't mean the counter snob. You mean the institutional snob. So we have
the counter snob. The anti-snob is someone who says the entire hierarchy is stupid.
Wait, what's the difference between anti-snob and counter-snob? They seem the same to me. Linguistically, maybe it's an issue of semantics.
Well, okay, the anti-snob says that the Tufts guy's whole system of judging people is flawed.
Okay.
The counter snob actually works on the snob's terms and simply tries to beat the snob at his own snobby game. So the Tufts guy says to the Harvard guy, "Wow, that community college kid kind of sucks. He goes to a community college." The Harvard guy, if he's a counter snob, says, "Who are you to talk? You just go to Tufts. I go to Harvard."
Okay.
You see what I mean?
I would call. Can we call him a coalition snob?
Sure, well, let's call him a coalition snob. Yeah.
Because a counter snob sounds too much like he's anti the snob system.
Sure.
Call him a coalition snob.
Sure. Okay. I think the right thing to do...
For the Tufts guy, what does the Tufts guy do now?
Oh, I don't know.
How does he respond? Because I think that's an interesting question.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, sure, we can delve into that.
Okay.
Before we do, let me just say this. Going into this conversation, I think that we should strive for anti-snobbery as much as possible. But it is so tempting, and my siblings agree, to just be a counter snob, or what we're going to now call a coalition snob.
See, what I think is very common is to be a snob bystander and to just laugh. Is that
that's
okay?
the
What if
worst.
you think that's the worst? Because sometimes, what if, let's say, this Harvard guy and this Tufts guy aren't exactly friends? Or let's say they're acquaintances, they're sitting down at dinner. Let's say they all work together on something maybe like Chelsea and I do with the College Democrats of Massachusetts. Let's say this is exactly the case. We got a guy from Harvard, a guy from Tufts, and a guy from a community college outside Boston. Let's say they all work for the Republican College Republicans of Massachusetts, excuse me. And one of the Harvard guy says to the Tufts guy, "Wow, that Republican guy from the community college really isn't going to help us out much. He goes to a community college." Let's say that's the case. They don't really know each other. But the Tufts guy, in order for diplomatic reasons, might not turn around and say, "Hey, that's wrong. Don't say that like that. He could help us a lot. He seemed like a pretty competent guy, even whatever. That's not the system on which we should judge someone." And he might just laugh it off. You understand that there are often a lot of diplomatic pressures in social situations that inhibit the kind of direct confrontation that you're pushing for.
Oh,
here,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
It's not, even though
I understand that.
Even though anti-snobbery might be the ideology that the Tufts guy is harboring, the approach to the ideology might not be. The situation might not be conducive to the approach to the ideology that you're advocating here. As opposed to being an advocate, he might be a bystander.
Who is the bystander?
The Tufts guy. The Tufts guy, he might just laugh it off.
He might laugh off what the Harvard guy said?
Exactly. even though in the back of his mind he's thinking, no, I'm an anti-snob with the Harvard guy saying wrong, but I'm not going to correct him.
Well, you see, in this hypothetical, the Tufts guy is himself a snob because he looks down on the guy who goes to the community college.
I see. You're saying in the keys with all right, sorry, we're being confusing here. Let's lay out the hypothetically clear. Let's all agree. We have Harvard guy who's a snob, and we have Tufts guy who's a coalition snob.
That's actually not what I was intending. We can change
Jesus.
it. Here, let me spell
right,
it out again.
Lay out the hypothetical again.
You got three guys hanging out. One goes to a community college outside of Boston. One goes to Tufts. One goes to Harvard. Okay.
I'm very interested in their social relations. How well do they know each other? That matters a lot for me.
They don't know each other. They don't know each other that well.
So it's like I said, they could be meeting for a conference for the Massachusetts College Republicans.
Right. They all come together. They meet each other, introduce themselves, let each other know where they go to school, and the guy who goes to a community college walks away. The Tufts guy, being a snob, says to the Harvard guy, wow, that guy sucks. He must not be very smart. He goes to a community college. The question now is, what does the Harvard guy say? The Harvard guy could try to out-snob the snob, that is, beat the snob at his own game by saying, who are you to talk? You go to Tufts. Because Harvard is ranked higher than Tufts on some standards. If he's an anti-snob, he would say, well, that's really not the basis upon which we should judge people. We should see what he does with the education he has and see how morally he acts. That's what really matters. That's what the Harvard guy would say to the Tufts guy if the Harvard guy is an anti-snob. The question here is, which is the better approach, or is there something better than that? And Will has already broached the possibility that it's very difficult to say either of those things when you're just meeting someone and you're trying to come off as competent or intelligent or whatever it may be.
So I think it depends a lot on the content of the conversation beforehand and the social relations. Let's pitch a possible scenario where the community college guy really has said something dumb. He really has. Maybe he's just been a jerk. Maybe he walked away because he said that the meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. and the Harvard and Tufts guy got there at 6:05, and the community college guy said, oh, no, I got to leave now. You guys were late. He's just a jerk. He's not a nice guy. And he is not really in it for everybody else. He didn't have anything nice to contribute. He just criticized everyone else's ideas and then walked away without even saying goodbye. It would seem reasonable for me, as from the Harvard guy's position, to say, you know, he was not very nice. You're right. He walked away. And in that way, to try and change the terms by refocusing the criticism on the actions and on the moral judgments of the community college guy.
Right.
I think that can be a very effective way to change the terms. But
Absolutely.
but I think that's very much, you could argue against me and say that's not truly anti-snob, that's still being a bystander. What do you think about that?
No, I don't think that is being a bystander.
You think that's a good strategy in response?
I do, because you're not being a bystander. You're offering a different sort of hierarchy, a moral hierarchy that the snob should adhere to instead. Now, I'm not a fan of snobs in general, but if one must differentiate between people on some scale, then I would prefer for that scale to be a moral scale. If the Tufts guy says to the Harvard guy, wow, that guy kind of sucks, probably because he goes to a community college, the Harvard guy could very well say, and I think he'd be justified in saying, well, it doesn't matter that he goes to a community college. What matters is that he was a rude guy.
But do you think in order to be a true anti-snob, you have to add that part about it doesn't matter that he goes to a community college? Do you have to bracket the additional criticism with that? That's my key question.
Ideally,
here, because
you
that's
would.
Diplomatically difficult. But that's diplomatically difficult. So what is politically viable to say? That's the question.
The truth is, I've done it. I have done that, and I've
can
survived socially. I've made it out all right.
Why don't you tell us the story?
Well, sure. This actually happens a lot. Sometimes I'll be talking with a group of people, and someone will make a cruel point or a crass point or a point that's ungrounded in some respect, and that person will walk away, and everyone will start talking about that person. And it's common for whatever reason, especially when I was younger, not so much anymore, but maybe in middle school and high school, for someone to say, yeah, that point sucked. Also, he's really ugly, or she's really ugly. at that point, I'll say, stop. It doesn't matter what he or she looks like. What matters is the content of their speech and the way they conduct themselves. And that's a totally reasonable basis upon which to judge a person. And of course, we understand that people can change and that one person's action in one scenario isn't representative of the person as a whole always. But if we are going to judge people, then we should judge them based on the way they conduct themselves. And we shouldn't judge them based on if they're attractive or not. And I actually do say this. And sometimes people just roll their eyes or laugh it off. But sometimes they say, okay, actually, you're right. And it's okay. I figure that if you're hanging out with the kind of person who really thinks that it matters that someone is ugly, then you really shouldn't be that concerned with the impression you give them, because that's not the kind of person you necessarily want to be friends with anyway.
God, I'm ugly and I say stupid stuff just like that, so I'm bad in both boats. Wow, that's rough. That's rough.
You're neither of those things.
I think humor actually has an interesting role to play here.
Yeah.
What if you say in response, instead of taking the, I would say, legalistic approach, instead of trying to correct the terms clearly, like the professorial approach, instead of saying, well, the way in which we should judge people is not based on how they look, but how they act and how they speak. And if you do have a problem with how he speaks, it'd probably be best to confront him directly and say, this and this was wrong. But we shouldn't really be bringing in an appearance here. Instead of taking the professorial approach, don't you think it might be saying, well, he might think you're ugly too, and try and make a joke out of it? What do you think? Because the issue with humor, right, is that it has the ability to be much better received while still potentially making a point. But the truth is that the point rhetorically can be much less clear.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem, that the point rhetorically can be much less clear. That's why I think there is a way to use humor, but it's very difficult. Here's another example that my cousin gave me when I was talking to him about this. He went to the University of Michigan Law School, and a lot of the kids there went to Ivy League schools, and he could tell that a lot of them thought that they were superior because of it. He met this kid who went to UPenn, and he said, where'd you go to school? Or actually, I don't think my cousin asked. The guy just threw in that he went to UPenn.
Okay.
And my cousin said...
He was like, cool.
And no, my cousin said, "Oh, where's that?" And the guy freaked out. He said, it's in Pennsylvania. Because he knew he wouldn't do that with anyone who went to a highly ranked school. He just did that with someone who he knew thought he was superior because he had gone to a high ranked school. He was trying to bring him down to earth a little bit.
Is that in Penn, California? It's the University of Penn.
And that is humorous in a way. That's just messing with someone.
Is Penn, California spelled with one N or two? I'm just curious.
I don't know. I'll Google it.
Cool.